I joined the police in the early 80s. I always wanted to deal with serious crime. I was a detective superintendent and I was head of major crime for Cambridgeshire. In the course of my 30-odd years as being a detective, this was one of, if not the most complex investigations I've ever come across. This was a case that started off as a missing from home report and then spiralled into an international manhunt.
Hello, I've just come home from school and my mum is not here. What do I do?
On the 12th of August 2011, Vitalia Balatarvicieni was reported missing by her son and her boyfriend, Akko.
Vitalia, who's 29 years of age, 5'6" in height. She was a well-liked individual who'd moved from Lithuania to set up a better life for her and her son. She'd only been in the country a matter of months and had literally started afresh. And all she cared about was giving her son the best opportunity in life.
Vitalia would normally wake up before her son and leave the house for work around 5 a.m. Ordinarily, Vitalia would be taken to work by a friend, but her friend's car broke down that day, so she arranged to meet another friend for a lift.
So the friend had turned up to pick her up and there was no sign of Vitalia. So Akko had contacted the company where she worked in Fen Drayton, just outside Cambridge, and ascertained she hadn't been at work all day long. She had completely and utterly disappeared.
As a result of her son and boyfriend's search for her, Cambridgeshire police launched an investigation into Vitalia's disappearance.
The last sighting of her had been around 5 a.m. in her kitchen by one of her neighbours. That neighbour hadn't seen her leave the house, but he'd seen her in her kitchen at 5 a.m. And as far as we were concerned, that was the last time she'd been seen. 99% of missing from homes turn up within the first 24 hours. They're found alive, safe and well. But there was a mother who'd left a 10-year-old son that she was devoted to and no one had seen from her. And everything about this case was worrying. But more worryingly, it was identified that she'd been the victim of previous domestic abuse. The perpetrator was her ex-husband, Romantas Balutavicius.
Vitalia and Romantas got together in Lithuania when she was just 17 years old. They had a son and married in 2007. They divorced 3 years later, and Vitalia relocated to England.
It was in early 2011 when she lodged a complaint of assault against Romantas.
But Romantas failed to return to court to be charged, and as a result, a warrant for his arrest was issued.
What we know is that he'd skipped the country and returned back to Lithuania. The first 2-3 days of any inquiry is absolutely critical. And if you don't get things done quickly, then it becomes very difficult to solve as the crime moves and the investigation moves further down the line. As a senior investigator, it's extremely intensive. You know you're not going to be spending much time at home. Every decision, everything about the job is going to come via you. It's extremely challenging, and my wife, understood that that's what I did for a living, and when it happened, I wasn't going to be there.
Within 24 hours, police had telephoned Romantas.
Mr. Romantas?
When he was questioned about the whereabouts of his ex-wife, he said he had no clue where she was. He hadn't seen her. He said she owed him a load of money. And he also said he hadn't been to the UK since February 2011, some 6 months earlier.
The police's best possible lead to find Vitalia had come to a dead end. Her ex-husband, Romantas, was 1,300 miles away in Lithuania.
I became involved in this investigation on Monday the 15th of August. There was a strong validation that because we'd made a phone call to Romantas, his phone was giving us an international dial tone. There were some people within the inquiry who thought, well, he won't be responsible because he's not even in the UK. We were much more thorough than that over that weekend, and we started to get some call data coming back from people's phones. One such piece of information was Romantas's mobile phone, and very significantly showed that on the 11th of August, that phone was in the proximity of the port of Dover. When it registered on the UK mobile network, received a welcome to the UK text message.
Phone records had contradicted Romantas's account that he had not travelled to the UK in the last 6 months.
I have not seen them.
The data showed that his phone arrived in the UK just before midnight on the 11th of August.
We identified one ferry that came in at that time. Our principal line of inquiry was to find Romantas Baliutavicius on the passenger manifest of that ferry. And I was expecting that phone call to come quite quickly. The phone call that I got was, Romantas Baliutavicius does not appear on the passenger manifest. I was devastated. It started to throw open a whole raft of other alternative explanations. What explained the absence of his name from that passenger manifest?
Four days after her disappearance, Lithuanian police entered Romantas's property and found a vehicle. A white Mercedes van with the license plate ANU 666.
What we found was that just before midnight on the 11th of August 2011, that vehicle was coming off of a ferry in Dover, entering the UK. The passenger with that vehicle was a man by the name of Remus Venclovas. The telephone number we had for Romantas, we had pinging at exactly the same time and place as the vehicle registered to Venclovas was entering the country. We looked at the CCTV, and there, driving the vehicle ANU 666, was the man who looked strikingly like Romantas. We were absolutely convinced that Romantas and Remus Venclovas were one and the same person. So when we spoke to her two best friends, Vitalia had told them how terrified she was of her ex-husband. Romantas was an insanely jealous man. He was a really difficult man, and he was an abuser. He'd made horrible threats to her about putting her into a box, that her destiny was that he was going to kill her. He wanted to do her harm and had threatened to do her harm. She was absolutely petrified of him. At that point, the focus of the investigation became on identifying where Romantas was, because it was strongly suspected that wherever Romantas was, so would Vitalia be.
The next investigative tactic from Mark Bircher's team was to carry out a CCTV sweep around Vitalia's home address.
If you don't get your CCTV soon enough, many cameras will only record on a 24-hour timeline. If you don't do it quickly, then you're going to be in trouble.
At that stage, there was an incredible breakthrough made. One of the CCTV cameras, less than 100 yards from the home address of Vitalia, showed a woman being abducted by a man and being dragged away against her will. And then she was being seen dragged towards a vehicle. It wasn't clear who the kidnapper was, but what was clear was that the woman closely resembled Vitalia. The time and the route matched her route to work exactly, 5:20 a.m. on the 12th of August.
Knowing that Romantas's vehicle was in the country, the team reviewed the CCTV footage of roads from Dover to Peterborough.
Every vehicle rolling off a ferry at Dover goes through an automatic number plate recognition camera. So once that first image is captured, wherever that vehicle hits ANPR, anywhere else in the country, we can track the vehicle's movements. What we were able to show was the Mercedes van was hitting cameras coming all the way up to Peterborough.
A further CCTV sweep of the area placed Romantas's vehicle on an adjacent road at 6:15 a.m.
So that's her address, Burma Road. So that's where she walked out on the morning. And then she's walked down Burma Road, which is where we are.
The van was parked at the bottom of Thistlemore Road, which puts him in proximity to her address because it all links round.
Yeah.
We don't know where he was, but what we do know is he had a clear enough view of her to come from behind and grab her.
And then he grabs her walking around this corner.
Yeah. It was those two cameras there that spotted it.
One that's outside.
So that one picks him, follows them down that street, but there's one on the front face of the building which captures them.
But so he's literally grabbed her there.
And then just as she was going to cross the road, he then comes with left arm forcibly around her neck, and you can see her resisting. He wants to walk her forward, and she clearly doesn't want to be with him. And there's that 2 or 3 seconds of passive resistance.
Yeah, you see it.
And then you can almost see the realisation in her, in the way she behaves, this man that's put so much fear into my life for the last 10 years has got me, and I ain't going to get away from him.
Yeah.
In my experience as a senior detective, I know that the highest number of homicides in the country start as domestic abuse. They then spiral, sadly, into homicide. I just hoped in this occasion this wasn't going to be the case.
We were realistic about it. We were 6 days behind him. We didn't know where he was. We knew he was still alive, but nobody had seen Vitalia. Every briefing, every day of the week was, we treat this as a live kidnap investigation. Whatever hope there is of Vitalia being alive, we take opportunities to find her alive. This was a crime in action until we found her body.
So we applied for a European arrest warrant. We wanted him arrested. And then just before we were about to execute the arrest warrant, we received intelligence from the Lithuanian authorities that he was trying to sell the Mercedes van. So suddenly it became really, really imperative that we got there and we arrested him as soon as possible.
I had a team from Cambridgeshire Police working in Lithuania with the Lithuanian authorities directly. So I arranged to pose as a customer interested in buying the van. So we had a conversation with Rimas covertly on the telephone and arranged to meet to view the van with him in a supermarket car park. And I knew that that would be the way that we would get him and the van together. And that was going to be absolutely crucial, evidentially. As soon as he arrived, officers engaged him.
With Romantas in police custody awaiting extradition back to the UK, forensic analysis began on his van.
The van was crucial to this investigation. If Vitalia's hair or blood or fingerprints were inside that vehicle, the assimilation that I would have made was that he has killed her in that vehicle.
The van had clearly been customised. The windows had been tinted, blacked out, the seats had been removed from the back of the van, and what was also really worrying for us was that the floorboards had also been taken out from the back of that van.
Everything that would have or could have come into contact with Vitalia had been stripped out and disposed of. It was just a shell with an engine and a driver's seat. And that told me a lot. That said that this was a significant crime scene, but he'd cleaned it within an inch of its life, and we never found any trace of Vitalia in that vehicle.
However, detectives discover Romantas' sat-nav.
Everything pointed to the fact that we had a serious crime to investigate. She hadn't used her bank account. She hadn't made contact with any friends or family. She hadn't spent any money. She hadn't used her phone. She hadn't done anything that any normal human would have done. She'd disappeared from the face of the earth. We were resolute that following those inquiries, sadly, Vitalia had been murdered.
After his extradition from Lithuania, Romantas was charged with Vitalia's murder and brought to Thorpewood Police Station in Peterborough.
One of the big challenges of a European arrest warrant is that with our legal system, once a person has been charged, they cannot be questioned about the offence to which they've been arrested.
But I knew that I was going to have to make a phone call to Vitalia's mum to say, we've got him, he's going to court, and there's going to be a trial. And I knew that she was going to ask me, where is my daughter? And I had this moral dilemma that the law didn't permit me to interview him to ask him that question versus the public interest who expect the police to ask those questions. And I sat and thought about it and made a very detailed decision that this is the police's job. And irrespective of the risks that I was going to take around the fairness of the interview or the legality of the interview, I wanted to find her body and I wanted him to tell me where it was. And at the very least, he had to be asked the question. So I put two very experienced investigators into that interview room to ask one question: where is Vitalia? And they asked that question and he pretty much smirked at them. What I didn't know was that the investigators had taken a picture of his son And they put it on the table and said, then you explain to that boy in the future what you did to his mother. It seemed to antagonise him. And whilst the officers went much further than the brief, one of the crucial things that they did was to advise that we had seized his sat-nav. As soon as they mentioned the sat-nav, the colour drained out of Ramantas' face, and it was obvious that that sat-nav was going to be crucial to the investigation.
So having exhausted all the forensic examination methods and been unable to tie Vitalia into the white van, we now had to concentrate on technical evidence. And that meant we were going to concentrate on the sat-nav, the telephone, the ANPR, and the CCTV examinations. The hope was always going to be that those 4 tranches were going to identify where Vitalia had been buried.
It was clear that Ramantas was never ever going to help us, but the reaction to the sat-nav gave us an opportunity, a glimmer of hope that actually, could that sat-nav actually tell us the story of what happened here and actually unfold the pages of the book that had not yet been written.
For several weeks, the sat-nav was examined by Cambridge High-Tech Crime Unit.
And what I was being told was that there was very little information on the sat-nav, which surprised me. So I asked for it to be checked again, and I got a similar response that there was very little history on it and actually nothing much to steer out investigation.
This case was now a no-body murder inquiry. He's been charged with a murder, and the trial date was set for March 2012. No detective would want to go into a murder trial without the body if they could avoid it.
What I was being told was that there was very little information on the sat-nav. But I wasn't satisfied. There was a voice nagging me inside my head that there's more to this, we've missed it, and maybe we just haven't got the capability to extract it. So I identified a private company who specialise in digital downloading, and very quickly was given a very different picture of events.
Martin Brunning brought the sat-nav to us to ask us whether we could take a look at it. It had been looked at internally by his own high-tech crime unit. They'd managed to get no information from the sat-nav, but Martin was convinced that this was where information lay that would help with the investigation. The very first thing we did was went and bought an exact replica of that sat-nav. That device was then given to one of the forensic analysts who stripped that down to component parts and was able to see that there was an internal memory card, but also, and more importantly, there was memory stored on the actual device itself. After we'd managed to break down the replica device, we were able to then take the suspect's device, extract the internal memory, and from that we were able to extract a file. Taking the data from the file took a matter of hours. So we were able to go back to Martin within a couple of days with all the data that he required.
Martin Brunning was presented with a dossier which maps 6 months of history. Every road, every route and every stop Ramantas had made was now known.
He may well not have been programming his destinations, but whilst this thing was on in the vehicle, it was covertly recording all of his activities. This electrified the investigation. Now, chase was on to find Vitalia.
We were sure that the sat-nav was the key to unlocking where Vitalia's body was. We strongly believed that Ramantas had buried Vitalia somewhere in the local vicinity. The area around Peterborough is a challenge for us. It's boggy, it's wet, there's wooded areas, so all of this took a lot of time and a big challenge to search.
This site was a particular site of interest because of the fact that it had been pre-programmed into the sat-nav. And we knew what time the vehicle was here, and very quickly we came. We spent a couple of days working through the margin of the lakes all the way along, covered the whole body of water. You put so much energy into making sure that you cover it properly to find that body. But this became one of a number of sites of real disappointment for the investigation team. It just didn't feel like the obvious place. You would never have discreetly got that body out of a vehicle.
No.
It didn't feel right at all.
This road is the main road for commuters coming into Peterborough. You know, it's a busy main road. Yeah. It's a summer's morning, it's light. The whole of this area is exposed, even though there's water over there, and the risk for him to get a body out the back of his van and take her across the water would be, you know, far too high. Really, really exposed.
Yeah, I tend to agree. But at the time, of course, we know he's here, and we had to go through that process of making sure that she wasn't here.
All of these areas were searched meticulously and on more than one occasion. We deployed diving teams, dogs, foot patrols, pulsar search teams, and nothing was found at any of these locations. So we now had a trial fast approaching. We still didn't have the body recovered. For both the family and for us, it was imperative that we found the body.
After 6 or 7 weeks of intensive searching, we started to realise that we weren't going to find her body in the UK. And we needed to look at all of the journey that he took back to Lithuania to unravel where her body was.
And then, bingo. On the 1st of January 2012, we thought we had the breakthrough that was needed. On the 1st of January 2012, suddenly we thought we had the breakthrough that was needed when a body of a young female had been found on the Sandringham estate. A dog walker had been walking and found a partially buried body of a female buried in a shallow grave. The body was badly decomposed and had been in the ground between 1 and 4 months. The victim was white, 5'6", entirely matching the profile of Vitalia. And there was almost euphoria within the team as they thought, finally, we'd recovered Vitalia. And whilst our sat-nav work had shown no trip to that location, there was still an element of hope that this would be Vitalia's body. The forensic archaeologist carried out some work on the victim and profiled her as being aged between 15 and 23. Sadly, this victim was found to be a 17-year-old Latvian girl who'd been reported missing just a couple of weeks after Vitalia had been reported missing. We had her husband, Romantas, remanded in custody, charged with a murder with a trial fast approaching, and still no clue as to where he had concealed her body.
It was clear that Vitalia wasn't in the UK, and we now needed to go through a similar exercise of physically searching all of the points where we could show that the sat-nav had stopped through France, Belgium, Germany, Poland, and even as far as Lithuania.
Working through Interpol, Martin Brunning and his team sent specific coordinates for police in 5 different European countries to check and feed back.
And very quickly we got feedback saying this particular coordinate was a petrol station, this particular coordinate was a lay-by. We've looked at the land around the lay-by and there's no sign of a body. So quickly we were able to start striking a line through those that clearly weren't deposition sites.
After weeks of searching sites in Europe that matched the coordinates on Romantas's sat-nav, news came back to Martin Brunning that Vitalia's body was not at any of the locations.
The investigation had been running for 6 months into February the following year, and We were within a few weeks of a trial, a no-body murder trial. And that was going to be a difficult trial because we were going to have to play out Vitalia's final moments in front of her family with her body not still being found, and nobody was looking forward to that experience. For me, that was the job half done because that crucial breakthrough in finding her body still hadn't happened. It was a difficult period for us all. I had worked incessantly on this investigation for 6 months. I'd had a lot of sleepless nights, wondering what I'd missed. Had something been overlooked? Had we missed an opportunity to find Vitalia sooner? And I decided to take a day off with my family. My daughter was very young, and I'd missed essentially 6 months of her life because of the demand that this investigation had made. And I picked up my BlackBerry. I'll never forget the moment because I was stood at the bottom of the stairs when I read an email which was from Interpol to say that the Polish police had realised that several months earlier they had found a body of an unidentified woman with blonde hair, buried in a shallow grave in a forest in a town called Little Suchi.
A wild mushroom picker had been foraging in woods.
This mushroom picker, quite unwittingly, had bent down to pick a mushroom up and, in fact, had discovered a body. And I remember this feeling of elation reading the email on my BlackBerry, this kind of overwhelming sense of, finally, are we going to find her? Are we going to be able to give Vitalia's family some good news?
The body had actually been found 4 months prior to them notifying us, but the local police hadn't run the DNA against the profile that we'd sent out to Europe, believing that the victim was potentially a local prostitute who'd gone missing. We immediately wanted to cross-check the shallow grave against the stop points found within the sat-nav of Romantas. The Polish police sent us the exact coordinates. We couldn't believe what we saw. The sat-nav pinpointed that Romantas had stopped within 50 metres of the shallow grave where the body was found.
It was the most remarkable period in my life as a police officer, realising that you're perhaps now in touching distance of this quest that you've been on to find somebody for 6 months, and now it was within reach. It was a really poignant moment in my career. I went over to Poland with an investigation team. We were able to get DNA from this body, compared it with the sample that we knew belonged to Vitalia in the UK, and very quickly got a match. Vitalia was recovered from the ground in October 2011 and was found to have been violently strangled by Romantas Baliutavicius. We always had a very strong case, even in the absence of Vitalia's body. But the discovery of her body was the jigsaw now complete, and we could tell the truth to Vitalia's family of what had happened.
During the course of the trial, it came to light that Romantas made a previous trip to the UK just 2 weeks prior to Vitalia's disappearance.
He was monitoring the movements of Vitalia. He knew exactly where she was going, at what time she was going there. He was also researching how he was going to abduct her, how he was going to kill her, and how he was going to dispose of her body. He was ready to pounce. There was no doubt about that. He was absolutely planning to kidnap her and murder her. Romantas had entered the country just before midnight on the 11th of August in his white van, ANU 666. He'd then driven 167 miles from Dover up to Peterborough. He'd driven around in Peterborough in the early hours of the morning, and then he'd parked his vehicle just round the corner from where Vitalia lived and lay in wait.
I know the guy's a risk taker, but he's walked what we reckon, 300-400 yards from the end of the road, holding on to her. We know she was shouting out, "Help me, help me."
Yeah.
All the way up to here, where the car's been parked.
Yeah.
Incredible risk.
Yeah, but I know from the many people we spoke to just how scared she was of him.
Yeah.
And I think that was his trump card, that when he had control of her, he could do pretty much whatever he wanted to. And she may well have screamed for a short time, but I suspect he suppressed that.
He dragged her into the back of that van at 5:20 a.m. and that van didn't leave till 6:18 a.m. 58 minutes. Within that 58 minutes, he strangled her to death. My strong suspicion is he probably talked to her and threatened her. But ultimately, what was clear is that she had 58 minutes of hell in the back of that van. He panicked about depositing her body in the UK. He didn't know the area that well, whereas he knew Eastern Europe. He knew it was more remote, and he actually decided to take this enormous risk of going down to the Port of Dover and taking a dead body across in a ferry.
So we're now just approaching the ferry port in Dover. We can see the harbour ahead of us. It doesn't matter what sort of person you are, you've got a dead body that you've killed in the back of your vehicle and you're approaching a huge security check. What was going through his mind? He knows he's got to go and buy a ticket, because we know he bought a ticket about 11:15 on the 12th of August 2011. We've got footage of him purchasing his ticket. He's left a body in the back of the van while he's walked in and purchased that ticket. Whatever he'd done, he'd certainly made lots of preparation. He'd been planning to kill her. He'd been planning to kill her for weeks and weeks. You can see that this is the harbour at Dover, where all the ferries leave for the cross-channel crossings. Just before midday on the 12th of August 2011, Romantas would have driven down here, bought his ticket, got Vitalia in the back. He then would have gone to British Passport Control with his Lithuanian passport in his Lithuanian van. His heart must have been absolutely pounding, knowing that at any time he could be inspected and he could be found. He was absolutely taking one of the most insane risks, but it was definitely a risk that he felt was worth taking, because as far as he was concerned, he gets onto one of these ferries and he gets out there, across that channel, he was going to be scot-free and get away with murder.
So having crossed the channel, he drives across France, Belgium, Holland, Germany and into Poland. He arrives in Poland in the deposition site in the early hours of the 13th of August. This is the early hours of the morning in rural Poland. There is no one around for miles. Carries the body just 50 metres. He digs a shallow grave. And covers Vitalia over, leaving her in Poland. So he then drives the remaining 500 miles back to Lithuania in his home address. He then spends the next God knows how many days doing everything he can to eradicate any forensic evidence that may be in the van. But the one thing he failed to do was dispose of his sat-nav. At the conclusion of the trial, jury came back with a unanimous verdict of him being found guilty of the murder and abduction of Vitalia.
It was a very emotional end to the trial. And it's at moments like that when you realise the gravity of the privilege of being the person empowered to lead a murder investigation, to explain to a family why their loved one was murdered, and it was a very poignant moment. He would not let her be happy, even after divorce. And it was that jealousy, that hatred, that drove him to drive 1,200 miles to come and kill her. Had it not been for that sat-nav device, he may well have committed the perfect murder.
The sad thing for it all is that ultimately that child was left with no mother and his father was incarcerated in prison. This was a tragic end to a young woman's life who'd suffered so much already. Tragic.